The death cult in abortion was sponsored by the state. It will disappear when the state basically stops sponsoring, stops using your money to pay for it.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Faith and Reason, where we have got a week of really good news to share with you. It's unbelievable what's happened this week, from Trump's early executive orders taking effect, basically saving children from horrific trans surgeries, stuff like that. We also have governors doing pro-life legislation. It's been an incredible week for life and for family. We're also dealing with a week where we just experienced the Jubilee pilgrimage in Rome, youth, up to 1 million youth there, with Pope Leo doing adoration in front of the Blessed Sacrament and also the Mass there. Some things to talk about there, but in the United States, the church is really suffering. Frank Wright, Father Charles Murr, so good to be with you both.
Oh, good. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Father, can you start us off with, as we always do, with the sign of the cross?
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Amen. So let's start off with the good news first. We usually save that to the end, but you know what? It's just so much of it this week that we should start there. First of all, we'll start with something in the church. Lourdes. Lourdes has officially announced its 72nd miracle. It was the healing of a 67-year-old Italian woman by the name of Antonia Rocca from an incurable neuromuscular disease. She was officially presented at the Sanctuary of Our Lady of Lourdes last month. Now, this all happened in 2004. Mrs. Rocco began to suffer from primary lateral sclerosis, which caused serious muscle weakness, difficulty walking, severe migraines, and other symptoms. 5 years later, in 2009, she was debilitated, and her husband and her made a pilgrimage to Lourdes, France, to the site of Our Lady of Lourdes, to St. Bernadette, known for its healing spring waters that arose where St. Bernadette dug in the ground. So, during the presentation, Rocco recalled arriving in Lourdes in a wheelchair, struggling to breathe and swallow, not expecting to be cured. And on the second day of the pilgrimage, the sanctuary volunteers brought her to the famous baths. And we prayed together, she says, and that's when I heard a beautiful young female voice say 3 times, "Don't be afraid." At that moment, I burst into tears and prayed for the intentions I had brought with me. Rocco then described a feeling of sudden, sharp pain in her legs while being immersed in the water of Lourdes. And one night after returning home in her wheelchair, she heard that same beautiful voice urging her to call out to her husband and tell him what had happened. "Something has happened," Rocco recalled proclaiming, while standing up for the first time in several years, as they both realized she had miraculously been cured. And super beautiful story there, Father. You can go read the full details at lifesitenews.com. But I wanted to ask you this. There's this one detail in the story, Father, that just makes me go, what? So you'll read this in the story at LifeSite. Back in April, get this, after 16 years of extensive medical, pastoral, and canonical examination, Rocco's healing was approved as the 72nd officially recognized Lourdes miracle. Okay, wait a minute. 16 years of testing to make sure that this was a miracle, Father? Can you explain that one to us?
You can never be so sure. This is one of the things that really attracts me to Lourdes. I love Lourdes. It's an absolutely fantastic place. It's a place of true grace. Grace is in the air. What I enjoy very much about Lourdes, when I was a young man, there were 54 miracles recognized by the church. Now you're hearing of Lourdes. When I grew up, Lourdes, they went to Lourdes, this miracle happened, that miracle happened, blah, blah, blah. Everyone experienced a miracle, it seemed. There were only 54 recognized. Very strict, the church is, on the recognition of a miracle. The claims can be made by anyone. Anyone can claim them. And I'm sure that there are other miracles, but the ones, they have to be proven. And the church is, at least in Lourdes, certainly in Lourdes, was very scrupulous on this. As a matter of fact, you might be surprised to know that most of the doctors that they had examining these cases were atheists. They wanted nonbelievers. They wanted nonbelievers. This was the devil's advocate's kingdom, almost, to disprove. So that the ones that were shown as absolute miracles without a question were, in fact, without a question, miracles. That's the idea. And it bolsters everyone's faith to know this. Now you say this is what, the
72nd,
72nd miracle. Great. It's progressed since I was a boy. Therefore, but I mean, you can be sure there are thousands more, and interior miracles also, and miracles of faith, of people receiving their faith. How do you measure that? You can't. These are real, but the ones that can be proven, they have to be immediate. They have to have been diagnosed before going to Lourdes, the problem. They have to be immediate upon entering Lourdes, and they have to be examined by a doctor who is not necessarily a member of our faith, if at all, any faith. Objective. And they give us the right to say this is a miracle. That's fantastic. This is being treated seriously, unlike other places of alleged Marian apparitions. That's why Lourdes is such a beautiful and important place to all of us.
Well, it is simply wonderful to see the grace of God appear. So obviously, but even as Father says, but after a long and scrupulous process conducted by people who prefer terms like spontaneous remission. That's to say, terrible conditions simply going away for no reason at all. I think it's marvelous. And also the fact that it is a strict process is one that simply reinforces the faith. It's important to remember as well what Father says is that these scrupulously documented and investigated miracles, simply the tip of the iceberg. And once again, a reminder that divine grace does and can and does enter the world to transform people's lives.
Beautiful. But I wonder if someone at Lourdes thought, hey, if we get atheist doctors doing this, we might convert them as well. But maybe that wasn't the program. So
atheists need a miracle all their own.
Exactly. So we've got incredible news. I'm just going to run through a few of these because they're so momentous that's actually worth talking about even here. And this all happened this week. So on the abortion front, the Trump administration has revoked the Biden-era abortion rule allowing veterans to undergo abortions under the guise of medical care. So the Department of Veterans Affairs is reinstating the full exclusion on abortion and abortion counseling from the medical benefits package, which was removed in 2022. And really, you get the clearest depiction of what's going on in this quote from Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America. They said, the Biden administration's pro-abortion veteran affairs policy turned VA hospitals into abortion centers and violated federal law. Thankfully, this injustice is now corrected. So beautiful to return things back to sanity and stop from making the veterans hospitals into killing centers, which was that was so horrific just to think of it that way. On the IVF front, Trump also has some wins because you remember that insanity when we were talking about it, basically they were going to do an IVF mandate, every bit as bad as the contraception mandate that Biden was doing. Well, Trump was announcing he was going to do an IVF mandate. But sure enough, he's heard from the base. And the Washington Post is reporting that an administration official has informed the newspaper that unilaterally mandating IVF as an essential health benefit is no longer in consideration by the Trump administration. Thanks be to God. And finally, on the trans front, we've had just this week the fourth Chicago hospital to end trans surgeries for minors under 19. That was due to President Trump's executive order. And that hospital stopping it just this week was University of Illinois Hospital. And then in Richmond, Virginia, the Children's Hospital of Richmond at the university is the latest to join also in a list of medical institutions to retreat from transitioning gender-confused minors. And this news followed, the Virginia news followed similar announcements by Yale Medicine, Kaiser Permanente, Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, and U Chicago Medicine, all spurred by President Trump's earliest executive actions when he returned to office. It ended all federal support for transition procedures on minors, rescinding or amending all of the Biden health bureaucracy's past endorsements of underage transitioning, and calling for a review of the medical literature on the subject. And finally, in the Trump wins category, Catholic votes Brian Birch, great pro-life, pro-family Catholic activist, has been confirmed by the U.S. Senate as the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican. I want to stop there to let us breathe and just rejoice that all this good news is happening. You know, Frank, you've been accused many times of being an uber optimist with regard to Trump. This week, you're being proven correct.
It may surprise you to learn that I am often called some rather insulting things. And I think one of the worst things people do say about me is that I am an optimist, a reckless optimist. I'm not an optimist. You know, I hate telling people things that aren't true, and I won't do it. What I'm trying to point out is, in this case, is that this madness has been sponsored by the state. This death cult has been sponsored by the state. And when the state stops sponsoring it, it will disappear. The transgender madness will disappear. It was sponsored by the state. The death cult in abortion was sponsored by the state. It will disappear when the state basically stops sponsoring, stops using your money to pay for it and to advertise it and to finance it and spread it everywhere. Why does it do this? Every state, whatever it is, be it a democracy, a monarchy, a dictatorship, or whatever, has a state religion. And these were aspects of the liberal global state religion. This was their secular, godless, diabolical religion. That's why they spread it everywhere. That's why they used all our money to propagandize it and to basically finance an industry of death. And when you change the state religion from the secular religion of mankind and the cult of death to be inspired by the true religion, which is the Catholic faith and more broader Christianity, look at the change that you can do. This is the kind of change that is recommended in one of the encyclicals of the Catholic social teachings on civil government, that says that when the state is just, i.e., when it follows the natural order divinely created and inspired by God, people love it and the state will flourish. But when it doesn't, people will die and there'll be chaos and madness. And I think we can see that our Western world is beginning to detransition from that awful century-long nightmare we know as the liberal global experiment. So that's why I'm cheerful. That's why I'm a cheerful little hobbit. And don't you dare call me an optimist again.
I was recalling, while the two of you were dialoguing about important matters. These are important matters, they really are. I was recalling 7th grade with Sister Mary John. And the question was about presidential mottos. Whose motto was it? A return to normalcy. And everyone was saying Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I was the only one who got it right. Not that I was a great historian or student of history. I said, Warren G. Harding, in 1920, a return to normalcy. And it was exciting then because things had gotten so off track that normal was the epitome of wonderful. Well, this is where we are now. Getting back to normal is almost a reason for a parade, a ticker-tape parade. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. But it is a return to normalcy. Thank God. And I get a feeling it's not just here in the pro-life, but thank God it's in the pro-life because that's where we're suffering most of all. But in many things, in many attitudes that Americans are having, and not just Americans, I'm living in Europe. You would be surprised how many people are all of a sudden, the last couple of years, sympathetic to President Trump's agenda. It's amazing. It's amazing because they're seeing the fruits of it. They're seeing what it's producing. I think this return to normalcy is fantastic.
Equal rights for normal people.
So we've had a couple of governors take on the move to normal themselves, apart from Trump's work. Oklahoma governor, I got to read this because it's so beautiful. Not even what he did so much as his statement on it. Governor Kevin Stitt's executive order. It's instructing the state agencies to end all public funding to entities and individuals involved in or affiliated with abortion. And his post on social media, I just signed an executive order to shut down any backdoor funding of abortion-affiliated groups. Oklahoma is a pro-life state, and if you're tied to the abortion industry, you won't get a dime of taxpayer funding here. That was so beautiful. I thought, wow, fulsome pro-life, words from the governor. All of a sudden, I'm jealous of Oklahomans. I want to go live in Oklahoma.
Seriously, could either one of you imagine this even 5 or 10 years ago?
No.
This is wonderful. This is wonderful news.
He goes on a little bit. I'll read a little bit more from him because, obviously this came after the U.S. Supreme Court decision in the Medina versus Planned Parenthood case, which affirmed that states have the right to decide which providers can participate in their Medicaid programs. So here from the more official release, other than his really fulsome defense on social, which I loved, he said, Oklahoma is a pro-life state and our policies should reflect that at every level of our government. We won't allow tax dollars to indirectly subsidize and flow into the abortion industry under the guise of women's health. My order makes sure every public dollar aligns with our values and supports providers who respect life at every stage, end quote. So even the official announcement, it's still strong, amazing. And in New Hampshire, not nearly as courageous, but nonetheless, Governor Kelly Ayotte has signed into law 2 bills banning gender transition procedures for minors. With her signature Friday, New Hampshire has become the first New England state to outlaw transgender mutilation for children and teens. Finally, on a larger scale, LifeSite's reporting that LGBT activists in Oklahoma postponed their entire Pride event schedule due to lack of financial support, and LGBT groups in Texas and New York have also reported funding problems. Frank, you give us what you make of that.
Who knew if you stopped funding the agenda of Satan that it would actually start to disappear? Who knew? Who knew? Who knew that it was sponsored by the enemies of God and of civilization itself to replace your civilization with some kind of insane permanent social revolution that results in the radicalization of children to permanently sterilize themselves? This is marvelous news. It's absolutely marvelous news. Fundamentally, if the state monetizes and promotes a culture of death, if it destroys the essential value of human life with convenience abortions in state institutions, if it promotes these hypersexualized agendas that are utterly morally degrading, then the state is not just and it's not legitimate. It has no right to rule, and there is chaos and disorder in society. This is far more important than simply someone may object to, or your objections to the Rainbow Movement, or your objections to abortion or women's rights. This is about the justice of the state. This is not just the restoration of sanity to public administration. This is the state healing from decades of insanity and degradation. And it gives us hope for us all that we can turn a corner finally in the West and start to restore our civilization generally.
Thank you so much, Father. Thank you, Frank. Great to be with you as always. And God bless all of you. And we'll see you next time on Faith and Reason.